The conference room felt different that morning. Maybe it was the way sunlight poured through the tall windows, or maybe it was the excitement buzzing in the air. Either way, Richard knew this was his moment. After 3 long years of working late nights, missing family dinners, and fighting his way up the ladder, he'd finally made it. Regional Sales Manager. The title still felt new on his business cards. He stood at the front of the room, his presentation loaded and ready. The executive board sat before him, 12 pairs of eyes focused on the screen behind him. His boss, the CEO, sat right in the middle, her expression neutral but attentive. Richard took a breath and clicked to his first slide. The numbers were beautiful. A 40% increase in sales over 6 months, charts showing upward trends, client lists that had doubled in size. Every metric pointed to success, and it was all under his leadership. Richard couldn't help but smile as he walked through each slide, his voice growing stronger with every word. "As you can see," he said, gesturing to a particularly impressive graph, "our region has outperformed every other division in the company. These results speak for themselves." The CEO leaned forward. "Richard, this is remarkable work. Truly exceptional." She looked around at the other executives. "This is exactly the kind of leadership we need more of in this company." Richard felt his chest swell with pride. He'd worked hard for this. He deserved this recognition. The other executives nodded in agreement, a few of them even clapping softly. From the back of the room, his team of 12 sales representatives joined in the applause. Richard glanced back at them briefly, gave a quick nod, then turned his attention back to the executives who mattered. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes. More graphs, more success stories, more praise. By the time Richard wrapped up, he felt like he was walking on air. The CEO stood and shook his hand firmly. "Keep this up and you'll be sitting at this table soon enough," she said with a smile. After the meeting ended, Richard lingered in the hallway, accepting congratulations from the other managers. They patted him on the back, asked about his strategies, wanted to know his secrets. He loved every second of it. This was what success felt like. This was validation. His team filed past him on their way back to their desks. A few mumbled congratulations, but most just walked by quietly. Richard barely noticed. He was too busy replaying the CEO's words in his mind. The future of this company, she'd called him. Those words would look perfect on his LinkedIn profile. That afternoon, Richard updated all his social media. New profile pictures showing him in front of the company logo. A post about the successful presentation, carefully worded to sound humble while making sure everyone knew about his achievement. Within an hour, the likes and comments started rolling in. Former colleagues, old friends from business school, even people he barely remembered were congratulating him. His phone buzzed constantly. He sat in his corner office, the one he'd fought hard to get, watching the city below while responding to messages. The view never got old. From up here, everything looked small and manageable. He felt like he could see his whole future stretching out before him. That evening, Richard met up with a few other managers at an upscale restaurant downtown. They ordered expensive steaks and wine that cost more than his team members made in a day, but Richard didn't think about that. He was too busy telling stories about his rise to the top. "The key is confidence," he explained, swirling his wine glass. "You have to believe in yourself completely. No doubts, no second guessing. That's what separates leaders from followers." The other managers listened eagerly, asking questions, taking mental notes. Richard felt like a mentor, a guru of success. He talked about his innovative strategies, his natural ability to read people, his instinct for business. Every story made him sound a little smarter, a little more capable. What Richard didn't know was that back at the office, one of his newest team members was still at her desk. Her name was Kelly, and she'd been with the company for just 3 months. She was a data analyst, hired to help streamline the sales reporting process. While Richard was enjoying his celebration dinner, Kelly was staring at her computer screen, her brow furrowed. The numbers weren't making sense. She'd been cross-referencing the sales reports with the actual client database, something she did routinely to understand the business better. But several entries didn't match up. Deals that were listed as closed appeared as pending in the system. Clients who had supposedly signed contracts showed up as still in negotiations. At first, Kelly thought she was making a mistake. She was still new, still learning the company's systems. Maybe she was looking at the wrong data, but the more she checked, the more confused she became. The numbers Richard had presented that morning were different from what she was seeing in the raw data. She pulled up the presentation slides that had been shared with the whole company. There it was, that impressive 40% growth figure. But when she calculated the actual numbers from the database, she got something completely different, much lower. Concerning lower, Kelly sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This didn't make sense. Had there been a mistake in the report? Had someone entered data incorrectly? Or was something else going on? She thought about Richard's presentation that morning, the confidence in his voice, the way the CEO had praised him, the pride radiating from him as he accepted congratulations. Could there really be a problem with those numbers? Kelly looked at the clock. It was almost 8 in the evening. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. She saved her work, closed her laptop, and decided she'd look at it again tomorrow with fresh eyes. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she'd figure it out in the morning. As she walked to her car in the empty parking lot, Kelly couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her stomach. Those numbers kept running through her mind. Something wasn't right. She just couldn't put her finger on what. Meanwhile, Richard was finishing his third glass of wine, laughing loudly at someone's joke, completely unaware that the foundation of his success story was already beginning to crack. In his mind, everything was perfect. He was on top of the world, untouchable, destined for greatness. He had no idea that his moment of glory was about to become the beginning of his downfall. The truth was hiding in the data, waiting to be discovered. And once it came out, nothing would ever be the same again. Kelly spent the entire weekend thinking about those numbers. She tried to convince herself she was wrong, that she'd misunderstood something about the company's reporting system. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those mismatched figures dancing in her head. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. When she arrived at the office, Kelly went straight to her desk and opened her files. She spent the first 2 hours of her day going through everything again, line by line. The results were the same. The numbers Richard had presented didn't match the actual data. Not even close. She needed to talk to someone. But who? Richard was her boss's boss. Going directly to him felt wrong, especially since she was questioning his entire presentation. She was still on probation, still proving herself. One wrong move and she could be out of a job. During the morning coffee break, Kelly noticed Robert sitting alone in the break room. Robert was one of the senior sales representatives, a guy who'd been with the company for almost 8 years. Everyone respected him. If anyone would know what was going on, it would be Robert. Kelly poured herself a coffee and sat down across from him. Her hands were shaking slightly as she pulled out her tablet. "Hey, Robert, can I ask you something? It's about the sales reports." Robert looked up from his phone. His expression was friendly but tired. "Sure, what's up?" Kelly turned her tablet toward him, showing him the spreadsheet she'd created. "I've been comparing the quarterly reports to the actual client database, and some things aren't adding up. See this client here? They're listed as a renewed contract in Richard's presentation, but in the system it shows they canceled 3 months ago." Robert's face changed. The friendly smile disappeared. He glanced around the break room to make sure they were alone, then leaned in closer. "Where did you get this information?" "From the client management system. I have access because of my role. I was just trying to understand our sales process better, and I noticed these differences." Kelly pointed to another entry. "And here this company is listed as a confirmed deal, but they're still marked as in discussion in the database." Robert rubbed his face with both hands. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "Kelly, how long have you been here?" 3 months? Almost 4 now. And you're still on probation?" Kelly nodded, confused by where this was going. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke in a low voice. "What you've found, it's not new. Some of us have known about this for a while." Kelly felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "Richard has been playing with the numbers for months. Maybe longer. He calls it strategic reporting. We call it something else." Robert's voice was bitter. "He moves canceled deals to future quarters so they don't show up as losses right now. He counts preliminary conversations as confirmed sales. He takes deals that are falling apart and reports them as successful. But that's fraud, isn't it?" "Probably. But what are we supposed to do? We're sales reps. We need our jobs. The job market is terrible right now. Richard made it very clear that if we're not team players, we can find somewhere else to work." Robert looked at Kelly's shocked face. Last year, one of our colleagues questioned a report in a meeting. She was fired 2 weeks later. Richard said it was for performance issues, but we all knew the truth. Kelly felt sick. So everyone just goes along with it? Not everyone knows. Most of the team just does their job and doesn't look at the big picture. They trust that management is handling the reports correctly. Robert sighed. But those of us who've seen it? Yeah, we've been quiet. I have a mortgage, Kelly. I have 2 kids in college. I can't afford to lose this job. But he's lying to the CEO, to the whole company. I know. Robert looked genuinely pained. Believe me, I know. It keeps me up at night. But I've been telling myself it's not my problem, that someone higher up will eventually notice. I guess I've been a coward. They sat in silence for a moment. Kelly felt the weight of what she'd discovered pressing down on her chest. This wasn't just a data entry error or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Richard had built his entire success story on lies. What are you going to do? Robert asked quietly. I don't know. What can I do? You could report it to HR, or use the company's ethics hotline. It's supposed to be anonymous. Robert didn't sound very confident about that option. Do you think they'd actually investigate? Or would they just tell Richard and then I'd be gone? Robert shrugged. I honestly don't know. But Kelly, if you do report this, you need to be prepared. Richard has friends in high places. The CEO loves him. He's the golden boy right now. Going up against someone like that, it won't be easy. Kelly thought about her rent payment, her student loans, her car payment. She'd worked so hard to get this job. Was she really going to risk everything because of some numbers? But then she thought about what this meant. Richard was stealing credit from people who actually did the work. He was making the company think they were successful when they weren't. Decisions were being made based on false information. How long could this go on before it caused real damage? I need to think about this, Kelly said finally. Robert nodded. I get it, just be careful. And Kelly, if you do decide to report it, don't tell anyone else. The fewer people who know, the better. After their conversation, Kelly couldn't focus on anything. She stared at her computer screen, but the words blurred together. She went through the motions of her job, but her mind was elsewhere. That afternoon, Richard walked past her desk. He was on his phone laughing loudly about something. He didn't even glance in her direction. To him, Kelly was just another low-level employee, not worth his attention. He had no idea that she held information that could destroy everything he'd built. That evening, Kelly sat in her small apartment, eating takeout she couldn't really taste. Her laptop was open in front of her. The company's ethics hotline website displayed on the screen. All she had to do was fill out the form. Submit her evidence. Let someone else handle it. But her finger hovered over the mouse, not clicking. Once she did this, there was no going back. Her life would change, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse. There was no way to know. She thought about Robert's words, about his mortgage and his kids in college, about the colleague who'd been fired for asking questions, about the culture of fear Richard had created. Then she thought about the truth, about what was right, about the kind of person she wanted to be. Kelly took a deep breath, positioned her cursor over the submit button, and clicked. The form disappeared, replaced by a confirmation message. Your report has been received and will be reviewed within 48 hours. She closed her laptop and sat in the quiet of her apartment. Somewhere across town, Richard was probably at another celebration dinner toasting to his success. He had no idea that the wheels were already in motion. The truth was coming for him, and Kelly had just given it a push. Now all she could do was wait and hope she'd made the right choice. 3 days passed. Kelly heard nothing. She went to work each morning with her stomach in knots, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Every time someone from HR walked past her desk, her heart jumped. Every time her phone rang, she expected the worst, but nothing happened. Work continued as normal. Richard strutted around the office like he owned the place, still riding high from his successful presentation. He'd started wearing more expensive suits. His watch looked new and flashy. Success had gone straight to his head. On Thursday afternoon, Kelly noticed something different. 2 people she didn't recognize were in the building. They wore business casual clothes and carried laptops and folders. They walked with purpose, like they knew exactly where they were going. One of them was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. The other was a younger man who kept taking notes on his tablet. Robert caught Kelly's eye from across the office and gave her a subtle nod toward the visitors. She understood. The investigation had begun. The two strangers met with the finance director first. Then they went into a conference room and stayed there for hours. Through the glass walls, Kelly could see them spreading papers across the table, pointing at computer screens, having intense discussions. Richard noticed them too, but he didn't seem concerned. During a team meeting that afternoon, someone asked who the visitors were. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Just the audit team. Standard year-end stuff. Nothing to worry about. They do this every year. But Kelly noticed something in his voice, a tiny crack in his usual confidence. Or maybe she was imagining it. The audit team, led by the woman whose name turned out to be Patricia, worked quietly but thoroughly. Over the next week, they interviewed people from different departments. They pulled old files from the archives. They made phone calls to clients claiming they were conducting a routine satisfaction survey. Kelly watched it all from a distance, trying to act normal. She did her job, attended meetings, smiled when she was supposed to smile. But inside she was a mess of nerves and second-guessing. Had she done the right thing? What if the audit found nothing wrong? What if Richard somehow talked his way out of it? Robert was careful not to speak to Kelly directly during this time. They communicated through brief glances and small nods. Both of them knew something was happening, but neither could talk about it openly. On Friday of that week, Patricia's team started calling in sales representatives for individual interviews. They were casual about it, framing the meetings as routine check-ins. But Kelly knew better. They were gathering evidence, building their case, talking to the people who actually did the work. Robert was called in on Friday afternoon. He was in the conference room for almost an hour. When he came out, his face was pale, but there was something else there too. Relief, maybe. Like he'd been carrying a heavy weight and had finally set it down. That weekend, Kelly barely slept. She kept imagining different scenarios. In some, Richard was exposed and justice was served. In others, he somehow blamed everything on his team, and innocent people lost their jobs. Her imagination ran wild with possibilities, none of them good. Monday morning brought a shift in the office atmosphere. Richard seemed on edge. He snapped at people for small mistakes. He spent a lot of time in his office with the door closed, making phone calls. His confident swagger had been replaced with something that looked almost like nervousness. Patricia's team had expanded their investigation. They weren't being quiet about it anymore. They requested access to Richard's emails. They asked for permission to review his computer files. The finance director personally escorted them to the records room, where old contracts were stored. Kelly overheard two executives talking by the water cooler. "I don't know what they're looking for," one said. "But Patricia doesn't mess around. If there's something to find, she'll find it." The tension in the office was thick. People whispered in corners. Productivity dropped as everyone tried to figure out what was happening. Richard's team was especially nervous. They'd all worked under his leadership. If something was wrong, would they be blamed too? On Wednesday afternoon, Patricia's assistant approached Kelly's desk. "Excuse me, do you have a moment? Patricia would like to speak with you." Kelly's heart nearly stopped. She followed the assistant to the conference room, her legs feeling like jelly. Inside, Patricia sat with her laptop open, surrounded by stacks of documents. She looked up and smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who was very good at her job. "Please sit down," Patricia said. "I understand you're relatively new here. How are you finding the company so far?" "It's been good," Kelly managed to say. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Patricia nodded. "I'm conducting a routine review of our regional sales reporting. Nothing to worry about. I just have a few questions about the data systems you work with." She opened a file on her laptop. "You have access to the client management database, correct?" "Yes, that's part of my job." "And you're familiar with how deals are tracked through the system? From initial contact through to final contract?" Kelly nodded. Patricia pulled up a spreadsheet. Kelly recognized it immediately. It was almost identical to the one she'd created, the one that showed all the discrepancies. "Would you say this represents an accurate view of our client relationships over the past 6 months?" Kelly looked at the numbers. This was it. This was the moment where she either backed up her report or backed down. She thought about Robert's mortgage and his kids in college. She thought about the colleague who'd been fired. She thought about her own probationary period that was still ongoing. Then she thought about the truth. "Yes," Kelly said firmly. "That's accurate. and it's very different from what was presented in the quarterly report. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. Can you walk me through some of these differences? For the next 45 minutes, Kelly explained everything. The canceled contracts that were reported as renewals. The preliminary discussions counted as confirmed deals. The timeline manipulations. She showed Patricia how to cross-reference the presentation data with the actual database. She pointed out patterns that suggested the problems weren't just mistakes, but deliberate choices. Patricia listened carefully, taking notes, asking smart questions. When Kelly finished, Patricia closed her laptop and looked at her directly. Thank you for your honesty. This has been very helpful. What happens now? Kelly asked quietly. Now we complete our investigation. We verify everything we've learned. We make sure we have all the facts straight. Patricia paused. I can't discuss the details with you, but I can tell you this. When we find problems, we fix them. That's our job. Kelly left the conference room feeling drained, but somehow lighter. She'd told the truth. Whatever happened next, at least she'd done that. She didn't see Richard for the rest of the day. His office door stayed closed, but through the glass she could see him pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked like a man who knew his world was about to collapse but didn't know exactly when or how. The storm was coming. Everyone could feel it now. The only question was how bad it would be when it finally hit. The email came on Thursday morning at 9:15. Richard stared at his computer screen, reading the message 3 times before it fully registered. Meeting requested, Monday, 9 a.m., Conference Room A. Attendees, Patricia Rodriguez, Jennifer Walsh, HR Director, Legal Counsel. His hands felt cold. This wasn't a routine meeting. You didn't get called into a room with the CEO, HR, and legal unless something was seriously wrong. Richard's mind raced through possibilities. Maybe they'd found some minor accounting errors. He could explain those away. Maybe someone had complained about his management style. He could smooth that over too. He was good at talking his way out of problems, but deep down, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, Richard knew this was different. He'd seen Patricia's team working all week. He'd noticed the way people looked at him in the hallways. Something had shifted in the air and he was at the center of it. The weekend was torture. Richard barely ate. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw spreadsheets and numbers in Patricia's sharp, knowing eyes. He tried to prepare for the meeting, running through explanations and excuses in his head. But nothing felt right. Nothing felt like it would be enough. Sunday night, he sat in his expensive apartment, surrounded by all the things his success had bought him. The massive television, the designer furniture, the artwork he'd bought because it looked impressive. It all felt hollow now. Empty. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Richard got to the office early, hoping to gather his thoughts, but his mind refused to cooperate. He paced his office, straightening his tie over and over, checking his reflection in the window. He looked calm on the outside, professional, in control, but inside, he was falling apart. At 8:55, he walked to Conference Room A. His legs felt heavy, like he was walking through water. The door was closed. He took a breath, straightened his shoulders one more time, and knocked. "Come in," Patricia's voice called. Richard opened the door and immediately knew he was in trouble. The room felt like a courtroom. Patricia sat on one side of the table with her laptop and several thick folders. Next to her was Jennifer, the CEO, her face completely unreadable. The HR director sat to her left, and a man Richard recognized as the company's head legal counsel sat at the end. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "Richard, please sit down," Patricia said, gesturing to the single chair across from them. He sat. His confident smile felt fake on his face, but he held it anyway. "Good morning, everyone. What's this about?" Patricia opened her laptop without responding to his question. The screen reflected in her glasses as she pulled up the first document. "Richard, we've been conducting a comprehensive review of the regional sales reports from the past 18 months. We need to discuss some significant discrepancies we've discovered." The word discrepancies hit him like a punch to the stomach. Patricia turned the laptop so Richard could see the screen. Side-by-side comparisons. His reported numbers on the left. Actual client data on the right. The differences were impossible to ignore. "This client here," Patricia pointed to the first entry. "In your quarterly report, you listed them as a renewed contract worth $200,000. But according to our records and our conversation with the client, they canceled their service in March. That was 5 months before you reported them as renewed. Richard's mouth went dry. That must be a clerical error. Sometimes the database gets updated late or... Patricia clicked to the next slide. This company. You reported them as a confirmed deal worth $350,000. But they told us they never moved past the initial discussion phase. They decided not to proceed with our services. There might have been a miscommunication with the sales team. Sometimes they don't update me properly on... Another click. Another discrepancy. Then another. And another. Patricia moved through them methodically, each one more damning than the last. Richard tried to interrupt, tried to explain, but his excuses sounded weak even to his own ears. Jennifer hadn't said a word yet. She just watched him, her disappointment so thick Richard could almost taste it. He'd been her golden boy, her example of great leadership, and now she was watching him crumble. After the 10th example, Patricia stopped clicking. She pulled out a folder and opened it. We also have emails, Richard. Emails where you specifically instructed your team members on how to reclassify deals, how to move canceled contracts to future quarters, how to report preliminary conversations as confirmed sales. Richard's heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. I was just trying to present the information in the best possible light. It's not fraud, it's strategic positioning. Everyone does it in sales. Everyone does not do this, Jennifer said quietly. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. And this is absolutely fraud. The word hung in the air. Fraud, not a mistake. Not creative accounting. Fraud, Patricia continued. We've also spoken with 6 members of your team. They've confirmed that you created an environment where they felt pressured to go along with these practices, where questioning you meant risking their jobs. Richard felt panic rising in his chest. That's not true. I never threatened anyone. They're lying to protect themselves. We have documentation, Patricia said simply. She pulled out another folder. Written warnings you gave to employees who questioned your methods. Performance reviews that suddenly turned negative after people raised concerns. A termination from last year that coincided with an employee asking questions about report accuracy. The legal counsel spoke for the first time. His voice was formal, detached. Mr. Richard, based on our investigation, we've identified approximately $3.2 million in falsely reported revenue over 18 months. Your actual regional performance shows an 8% decline, not the 40% growth you presented. The number hit Richard like a physical blow, $3.2 million. He'd known the numbers were inflated, but hearing it stated so clearly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Jennifer leaned forward. I recommended you for that promotion. I praised you publicly. I told the board you were the future of this company. Her voice was thick with disappointment. I trusted you, Richard. Jennifer, I can explain. You already tried explaining. You lied to me. You lied to the board. You lied to everyone. She looked at the HR director, then back at Richard. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. For cause. The room seemed to tilt. Wait, we can work this out. I can fix this. You'll also be required to return all bonuses and commissions paid to you based on the falsified reports, the legal counsel continued, his tone unchanged. That amounts to approximately $87,000. We're also considering whether to pursue criminal charges, though we haven't made that decision yet. Richard felt like he was drowning. His career, his reputation, his future. Everything was disintegrating in real time. Someone from HR will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings, Jennifer said, standing up. Your access to all company systems has already been revoked. Richard wanted to argue, to fight, to find some way out of this nightmare, but looking at their faces he knew it was over. The lies had caught up to him. The shortcuts he'd taken had led him right off a cliff. He stood on shaky legs. The confident swagger he'd carried for months was gone. He was just a man who'd gambled everything on deception and lost. As he walked out of the conference room, escorted by an HR representative, he passed Kelly's desk. She looked up briefly, her expression neutral. She didn't look triumphant or happy, just tired, and maybe a little sad. Richard's corner office, with its view of the city, was emptied within an hour. Photos, awards, personal items all packed into 2 cardboard boxes. The nameplate was already being removed from his door as he left. His fall from grace had been swift and absolute. And it had all started with pride that couldn't admit the truth. The news spread through the office like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone knew Richard was gone. Some people whispered in the break room. Others exchanged looks across their desks. A few seemed genuinely shocked, but most just nodded quietly, like they'd been expecting something like this all along. Kelly sat at her desk, trying to focus on her work, but her hands were shaking. She'd done what she thought was right, but it didn't feel as good as she'd imagined. A man had lost his job. His career was destroyed. Yes, he'd brought it on himself, but still, there was no joy in watching someone fall that hard. Robert stopped by her desk around 2 in the afternoon. He didn't say anything at first, just placed a cup of coffee next to her keyboard. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Kelly admitted. "I keep thinking about what happened. You did the right thing. I should have done it months ago. I was just too scared." Robert looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Patricia told me they're keeping the source of the initial report confidential." "Your name won't come up," Kelly nodded. "That was good. At least she wouldn't have to deal with being known as the whistleblower." But somehow that didn't make her feel much better. "There's going to be a company-wide meeting tomorrow," Robert continued.
"Jennifer wants to address everyone."
"This is bigger than just Richard now. The whole culture needs to change." That evening, Kelly went home and tried to relax, but sleep didn't come easy. She kept replaying everything in her mind. The moment she first noticed the wrong numbers. The conversation with Robert. Submitting that anonymous report. Patricia's investigation. Richard's face as he left the building with his boxes. Meanwhile, across town, Richard sat in his apartment in the dark. The fancy furniture and expensive decorations mocked him now. He'd spent so much money celebrating his fake success. Money he now had to pay back. $87,000. He didn't have it. He'd spent it on suits and watches and dinners and trying to look like the successful person he pretended to be. His phone had been buzzing all day. Messages from former colleagues. Questions from friends. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Richard ignored them all. What could he say? That he'd lied his way to the top and got caught? That his entire career had been built on fraud? He thought about how proud he'd been just 2 weeks ago. Standing in front of the board, presenting those beautiful numbers, soaking up the praise. He'd felt invincible, like nothing could touch him. Now he felt like nothing at all. The next morning, the entire company gathered in the main conference hall. Jennifer stood at the front, her expression serious. Patricia sat in the front row. The mood was tense, uncertain. "I want to address what happened yesterday," Jennifer began. "As you all know by now, we've terminated Richard's employment due to serious violations of our ethical standards and falsification of company reports." People shifted in their seats. Some looked down at their hands. "But this isn't just about one person," Jennifer continued. "This is about a culture that allowed this to happen. A culture where people were afraid to speak up. Where asking questions was seen as not being a team player. That ends today." She outlined new policies. Anonymous reporting channels that would be truly protected. Regular audits that wouldn't just be routine checkmarks. Peer reviews for managers. Open-door policies that actually meant something. "And most importantly," Jennifer said, "I want to acknowledge that we failed you. Leadership failed to create an environment where integrity was valued more than impressive numbers." That was my failure too. I was so impressed by Richard's results that I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't look beneath the surface. That won't happen again. Kelly felt something shift in the room. It wasn't just about Richard anymore. It was about building something better. After the meeting, Jennifer announced that Robert would be taking over as interim regional sales manager. The appointment surprised some people, but not those who knew him. Robert was solid, honest, the kind of leader people could trust. Robert's first action was to meet with every single person on the team individually. He listened to their concerns, heard their stories about working under Richard's pressure, and he promised things would be different. "We're going to do this right," he told them. "Real numbers, honest reporting, no games, and if we have a bad quarter, we'll deal with it honestly and figure out how to improve." Together. The team was cautious at first. They'd been burned before. But slowly, trust started to rebuild. Kelly's probationary period ended 3 weeks later. Her manager called her into his office, and for a moment her heart stopped. But he was smiling. "You've done excellent work here. We'd like to offer you a permanent position, with a promotion to senior data analyst." Kelly felt tears prick her eyes. She'd taken a huge risk and it had worked out. Not because she'd tried to get ahead, but because she'd tried to do what was right. "There's something else," her manager added. "Patricia wanted me to tell you something, though she can't officially acknowledge your role. She said to say thank you. What you did took real courage." Over the next few months, things slowly got better. The regional numbers were corrected. Yes, they showed a decline instead of growth, but they were real, and with honest assessment came real solutions. Robert's team started working together differently, supporting each other instead of competing, focusing on building genuine relationships with clients instead of just chasing numbers. 6 months after Richard's termination, the region showed actual growth. Real growth. Not as dramatic as Richard's fake 40%, but honest 15% improvement. And that felt good. That felt earned. As for Richard, he struggled. He had to move to a smaller apartment, sell his expensive car. The $87,000 he owed hung over him like a dark cloud. Finding a new job was nearly impossible. Every interview ended the same way once they asked about his previous employment. But slowly, very slowly, Richard started to understand what he'd done wrong. Not just the lying about numbers, but the deeper problem. He'd cared more about looking successful than being successful, more about impressing people than doing good work, more about his own glory than his team's well-being. He took a job as an independent consultant. Small projects, honest work, nothing glamorous, but he started doing it right. When he made a mistake, he admitted it. When numbers were bad, he reported them accurately. It wasn't the corner office with the city view, but it was real. One day, almost a year later, Richard ran into Robert at a coffee shop. The meeting was awkward at first, but Robert, being the person he was, sat down with him. "How are you doing?" Robert asked. "Better than I deserve to be," Richard admitted. "I'm working on rebuilding, slowly, honestly this time." Robert nodded. "That's good. Everyone deserves a second chance, as long as they learn from their mistakes." They talked for a while, not as friends exactly, but as two people who'd learned hard lessons about what really matters. Back at the company, Kelly had become known as one of the most reliable analysts in the firm. She never told anyone about her role in Richard's downfall. It wasn't something she was proud of or ashamed of. It was just something she'd done because it needed to be done. Sometimes late at night, she thought about how different things could have been. If she'd stayed quiet, if she'd just done her job and ignored what she'd seen, would Richard still be there? Still lying? Still building his house of cards higher and higher? She'd never know. But she knew she'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the safe choice, but the right one, and in the end that's what mattered. The truth had come out. Justice had been served, and slowly, carefully, trust was being rebuilt, one honest report at a time.